Welcome to Politico's weekly podcast. I'm James Hellman in the Politico newsroom with two of our top reporters and an editor, Rachel Bade, Jed Roche, and Eric Bradner.
Woohoo.
Thanks, guys, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
I think that the old saying is that August is dead and quiet, and this week has proven that once again is not true.
Yeah.
There's a lot that's going on all of your beats, and I want to get to it. We're going to talk about the Africa Summit this week, some IRS news. We've now attacked Iraq. John Walsh in Montana dropped out, and a lot of the big midterm races are really coming into focus. So with that, let's start with the Africa Summit this week. Eric, you were following that closely. Tell us what happened, what were the key takeaways, and what didn't break through in a lot of the coverage. I think, we for our purposes, the biggest takeaway was the traffic that snarled D.C., but
right.
Real stuff happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is about the United States playing catch-up, right? China has spent the last few years, especially since about 2009, funneling a ton of money and effort into developing a trade relationship with Africa. And it's really transactional in nature. Africa has tons of oil and a lot of minerals, but lacks the technology, the know-how to extract it, to make that, very valuable. And China has said, okay, well, we know how to do that. We'll come in, we'll give you tons of money, and in exchange, we want your natural resources. The United States is trying to portray itself as a different kind of partner.
A partner, not a patron.
Right, exactly. Interested in human rights, interested in actually helping African countries sort of scale up, do some advanced manufacturing, some work that perhaps will allow them to sell more valuable products overseas, that kind of thing. And so the big announcement that President Obama had over the course of the week was $33 billion going to Africa. Now, that's kind of an inflated number because $5 billion of it's from the World Bank, $3 billion of it is from the Export-Import Bank, which, that's a loan. That gets paid back. And $14 billion of it is from the private sector, companies like GE that were already doing business there anyway. But $33 billion, that was the big number. That's nowhere near enough to make up for what China does, but it's enough to send a signal that the United States is really interested.
So President Obama obviously had his news conference at the end of his meetings, and it started more than 90 minutes after it was supposed to. Why was that? Were they hashing these things out? Any backstory there?
Not really. I mean, there were some meetings over the course of the day, but I think the president was busy with other stuff. He did, though, over the course of those 3 days, have a lot of meetings with African leaders, heads of state, and they talked about, not just trade and investment, but also dealing with corruption, with regional security, and that sort of thing. And there's also this other issue hovering over the entire summit, which is the fact that Congress is going to have to reauthorize the Export-Import Bank, and is going to have to renew the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which is this sort of little-known program that cuts tariffs on almost all African products, but it expires next year. And it's not nearly as controversial as the Export-Import Bank, but it's sort of in this backlog of little bills that Congress eventually has to move, and this Congress doesn't seem capable of doing that. So without those two programs, all of this is for naught. Those are really sort of central underpinnings to this entire effort. So
on the Export-Import Bank, I don't want to get too in the weeds here for our listeners, but this is obviously an issue Democrats are using to try and raise money.
Right.
And from business donors who are frustrated. This is kind of another little proxy fight in the Republican Civil War about what it means to be a conservative. What's your reporting suggest is ultimately going to happen? At the end of the day, people are going to relent and this will happen, or there will be big reforms? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, so the bank's charter expires at the end of September. So this is going to be dealt with before the election. I think what's going to happen here, the opposition is from conservatives like Jeb Hensarling. And I suspect that Democrats are going to force this to be something that's dealt with. At the same time, they talk about a continuing resolution to keep keep the federal government up and running. It's going to be hard for even diehard conservatives to say, we will shut down the government over the Export-Import Bank,
Right.
which is something most people have never even heard of.
Right.
But that's only a short-term reauthorization, which means we're fighting this battle again in a few months, and conservative opposition is really ramping up. Frankly, it's hard to see this bank continuing to exist in spite of the argument that China and Europe and all these other countries do the same thing in a much bigger way.
Right.
See, and I think the policy implications that are hearing Eric's perspective and the policy implications that are going on behind the scenes are so interesting, because from my beat, from the breaking news beat, I'm looking at everything from a very optics sort of oriented sort of perspective. And to me, I kept being worried about, I don't know if worried is the correct word, but looking at this gigantic Africa summit is going on, and yet there are all these other foreign policy issues. And I just see the kind of, you were talking about how small of a drop in the bucket $33 billion could be. How often Africa is like one of those topics that just fades out of the media narrative really quickly. And for me, the key moments that really stuck out wasn't necessarily Obama's press conference at the end. It was the dinner they had with all of the leaders the night before, where Obama gave a really personal speech. He talked about having African blood run through his veins, the relationship between the United States and Africa, and the sort of symbolism that his presidency, the kind of things that we've talked about before. But it seemed like a very sort of key moment in the relationship, at least in the optics perspective, in the relationship between the United States and Africa. And so I don't know how much of that is just optics and us kind of falling for what they're going for, or how much of it is an actual significant policy developments. And it seems like there are some that are happening.
Yeah, but that's a great point. And I talked to some African trade ministers and finance ministers over the course of the weekend. They said, we appreciate that. That's nice. But on the other hand, I mean, they're looking at the bottom line too. They're not, they like that President Obama is reaching out. They say he made all the right moves over the course of this week, but it's really about the bottom line.
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Eric. Let's move on to another big topic that has been kind of on the back burner than on the front burner. The IRS, these emails, more lost emails this week.
Well, it seems like, there's a new computer crash that the Republicans are talking about, every other week.
And they're doing that strategically, right?
Probably. I mean, obviously, this keeps it on the front burner. They probably have a lot more information on this than they're letting out right now. It's a little bit of a drip on information. But the big thing this week was that a federal court sided with the IRS when it came to these missing emails. A conservative group, one of the groups that had been targeted, says they were one of the groups targeted by the IRS during, the 2010 to 2012 period. Tea Party group, True the Vote, sued the IRS for not getting its tax-exempt status. They got their tax-exempt status a few weeks ago, but have continued their lawsuit, claiming that these lost emails are going to keep them from getting what they're owed in terms of a financial reward for, sort of being discriminated against. That's what they're continuing to sue for. And so they asked the federal judge here in Washington, D.C., they asked him to appoint an outside computer forensic expert to go in and to make sure the IRS was not destroying evidence, and to find these emails that this group is alleging are being intentionally hidden from the public to conceal some sort of malicious intent on the whole part of the Tea Party targeting. Was it connected to the White House? Did they do this? Did they have a political bias? Were they doing this on purpose? And so this group asked for this expert. The judge basically asked TIGTA, which is the IRS watchdog currently investigating this whole matter.
The Treasury Department's Inspector General.
Yes, the Treasury Department's Inspector General asked them, what are you guys doing on this? Are you investigating this? How good are your investigators? And they responded, they filed back to the court saying, we've got people working on this who know what the heck they're doing. We don't need an outside expert. And the judge sided with them and basically told the conservative group that there's a probe going on right now. I have no reason to believe that TIGTA, the Inspector General, is not able to be trusted.
Right.
So we're going to let this probe go through. So right now, everybody's sort of waiting to hear what TIGTA has to say. This Inspector General was the watchdog that originally uncovered the whole thing last year
Right.
about the targeting. So whatever they say is going to carry a lot of weight in terms of whether they think, Lois Lerner, the woman at the center of this, intentionally crashed her computer, to erase emails.
And what are the next steps? What are the next big milestones to watch for? And what might be the next shoe to drop? Or what's the timetable for more like
TIGTA.
real information
Absolutely.
on TIGTA, but also the broader IRS scandal?
Yeah. So the Inspector General investigation, that was supposed to come out before recess. Senator Ron Wyden, who chairs the Finance Committee in the Senate, basically asked them to report whether they think something, bad, like fishy, was going on with all this before recess. But the Inspector General was not able to complete that. Normally, they take a lot longer to do these sort of deep dive probes. So we're currently waiting on this Inspector General report. It could be 2 weeks. It could be a month. I think they want to get it out sooner rather than later, so I wouldn't expect it to be, another 6 months. A key question everybody is wondering right now is whether they've been able to find backup tapes of these emails. Originally, the IRS had said it's gone. It's gone. It's been recycled. It's been destroyed. There are no backup tapes. But the Inspector General, it turns out, actually found some, and they might have these emails on them. So we're all waiting for that. We're also waiting for various agencies who have been demanded by Congress to turn over emails that they might have exchanged with Lois Lerner. For instance, the White House did that. There was only a couple emails between the White House and Lois Lerner, and they weren't direct communications. She was just CC'd on something, and they were CC'd on something. But we're also looking at the Federal Election Commission, the FEC, where Lerner used to work as a lawyer for the FEC, bringing charges against a group not following election law. So they're trying to find out if she was in correspondence with them, telling them sensitive taxpayer information she was not allowed to tell them. Was she in any way in cahoots with someone over there who was trying to target conservative groups that were affecting the elections and having an impact on the elections? And right now, we have not seen any of the emails between those two agencies, and so that's going to be a big question.
And what's going to happen to Lois Lerner? Like, where do things stand? Is she going to face criminal charges?
I think that's unlikely, at least from what we've seen so far, especially with 2 years worth of emails gone. If there was a smoking gun, it would have likely been in those 2 years, because that was when the whole scandal started, was sort of around this time that her computer crashed and she lost all those emails from that time period. So I would be shocked to see the Justice Department bring her to court. It's basically up to them to do anything in terms of charging her or going that route at all. And they really haven't showed any sort of interest in that. In fact, someone leaked to the Wall Street Journal several months ago that the Justice Department didn't think there was anything here, and they were just going to, eventually fade out the probe, which of course ticked off a lot of Republicans
Right.
who are like, you're not even investigating this. What the heck are you doing?
Right.
But at this point, I really don't see the Justice Department doing anything, and would be surprised if they did.
Let's move on to Iraq. President Obama making a 9:30 p.m. speech on a Thursday night to announce that there would be limited airstrikes in Iraq, that we were making a humanitarian drop to help out some people who are on a mountain being besieged by ISIS. This is obviously is a big deal. He's now the fourth president in a row to authorize bombing of Iraq. Jed, you have been monitoring a lot of the fallout from this, the discussion and the debate. What's your big takeaway?
Yeah, I think one of the storylines that we're following in particular is actually more of a media story that's kind of led to this. I think you're going to see over the next couple of days that this was kind of an issue that if you had been watching Fox News, or if you had been watching some of the right-leaning blogosphere, the persecution of a non-Muslim minority group, or the Christian minority group, the Yazidis. I'm not entirely sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I feel like this is all relatively new information to us over the past 24 hours. But for if you've been following the conservative blogosphere, conservative media, this issue shouldn't necessarily be that new to you. They've been pushing this for a while. And in fact, Barack Obama cited specifically that Christians were among the group that were being persecuted. So I think that's one of the big takeaways here. And the second big takeaway is the use of the word limited. I think that you saw that in reference to the military airstrikes. It speaks to Obama being very cognizant of the fact that this is a war-weary country that has feels like it's being pulled in every direction when it comes to foreign policy. When you look at the summer we've had, the amount of foreign policy issues that have happened, I think the use of the word limited will probably come up again. And so the military airstrikes today, were specifically, strategically targeted to military points of action. And I think we're not looking to see another prolonged involvement in Iraq.
Speaking of word choice, the thing that the biggest thing I took away from this, from what the president said, he used the word genocide, which is a word that you don't use unless it's sort of a last resort. I mean, the word has so many international political implications. Basically says that if genocide is going on or there's a threat of it, the international sort of consensus is that you have to act in order to save people from being murdered because of their ethnicity or their religion. It's not a word we hear a lot in the media. And I just wanted to sort of read this quote that Obama said. He said, "When we have the unique capability to help avert a massacre, then I believe the United States of America cannot turn a blind eye. We can act carefully and responsibly to prevent a potential act of genocide. That is what we're doing on that mountain." So he's talking about this group of non-Muslim Kurds that are surrounded by ISIS on this mountain where the United States is going to be dropping humanitarian assistance, but also potentially, bombing some of these ISIS groups to keep them from taking this mountain and killing these people. But what is interesting to me about this is not just the word genocide, but he's used it in this circumstance. But when it comes to other sort of conflicts in the Middle East over the past couple of years, he's never used a word like that. I mean, you think about how many thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of Syrians have been killed,
right,
under Assad. Yeah, he never sort of used this language of we have to act. It was sort of more reserved. And now all of a sudden this is happening and we're going to be involved in this. Who knows for how long? But it's just interesting that it's happening just in Iraq, but not in all these other areas.
Yeah, Rachel mentions the situation, and the other thing that was striking to me was when we had the Syria crisis, Obama obviously made the strategic mistake of trying to go to Congress and have them approve action, and they ended up, of course, not.
Right.
And he had to walk away. This speech, which was a very cautious speech, in some ways, as Jed talks about, recognizing a war-weary America, was also a provocative speech, as Rachel points out, in the sense that he used the word genocide, said we need to avert a genocide, but he also presented it as a fait accompli, and it didn't say, I'm going to go to Congress. He said, I'll consult with Congress. But what did you make of that? And
yeah, I mean, this is a president who obviously ran as someone who wanted to end these sorts of entanglements, doesn't like them, has been criticized over the years for not being aggressive enough. And last night he seemed to be really straining to explain why is this different. The use of the word genocide, that's a great point, because that was, that was like the perfect example. But he was also talking about the timing, the fact that this is something that he can see coming before it happens, as opposed to what happened in Syria. He seems to have learned lessons from that experience, from realizing that Congress, even in these situations where he seems to see a pretty cut and dry course of action, it's going to be politically contentious. John Boehner and John McCain and Lindsey Graham have already criticized what the president's doing, saying that, when you use the word genocide, it's no time for half measures. He should have been doing something long before this. But yeah, I thought my big takeaway last night was that he was really trying hard to say, here's what's different in this case. Here's why this is not Syria. This is not Iraq a month ago or 3 weeks ago. This is a case where we have to act versus all these times that he hasn't.
And that's almost like isn't that almost like a liberal argument for involvement, or like that sort of, he's getting most of the response on the right comes from these hawks that are talking about national security, but like the humanitarian aspect of it is a very sort of specific part of the Democratic Party, and it kind of reminds me of like one of the people that I'm keeping my eye on over the next couple of days or hours, as it seems like the details of this are happening so quickly, is Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN. She wrote the book. I think I have it right here. It was called "Problem from Hell," and it's commonly referred to as like a textbook for modern look, very modern look at how genocide happens and different cases. So like anything she says, we saw it already with the downing of the Malaysian flight a couple of weeks ago, that she was allowed to speak.
She went further than
Obama
she was more.
Exactly. Yeah. She could speak more strongly than the administration could, and that was with an issue that wasn't even and that was between Russia and the Ukraine. And here we have examples where the president is calling it genocide. I want to see what she has to say and what other members of of Obama's cabinet, how strongly are they going to weigh in, and what does Samantha Power think?
Well, that's the contrast between candidate Senator Obama and President Obama, now second-term President Obama, is really striking. But I think all along there's been an internal division inside Obama as to whether he's an interventionist, or a realist. And sort of, I think he looks at some of the genocides that happened in Africa, and there was a lot of resistance to labeling what was happening in the Sudan in 2004, 2005 as a genocide, precisely because the United States did not want to have to go intervene and send troops into Africa in an open-ended conflict, when Iraq and Afghanistan were going on. And so I think, Obama obviously there are a couple things. I feel like he never wanted to be a wartime president. That's not how he wanted to be defined. He wanted to be the guy that ended the wars. And that's why you see that when he reluctantly addresses these issues. But it does feel like he's torn between wanting to go intervene in these humanitarian crises, but also recognizing that there's really not the political will, and that he's sent there to bring the troops home.
Right, exactly.
And in a lot of ways, I feel like even just looking at the polls, the number of people who want to, who think Iraq and Afghanistan were a mistake is at a record high, and the number of people who just like want to bring the troops home is at a record high. And that's why, frankly, like some of the libertarians, like a Rand Paul, get so much traction in a place like Iowa, is even a lot of Republicans have that feeling.
Sorry, you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I've wondered, like, if some of the humanitarian groups working, in Syria or working from the United States trying to help Syrians who are still being killed, I wonder if there is a sense of frustration because of that. Like, all of a sudden, we are going to be intervening in Iraq. Is there this sense of like, oh, we're getting gypped? We've been trying to tamper this violence and this bloodbath for years and not getting any help from the Obama administration, and now all of a sudden they're going to help Iraq. I mean, I'm just wondering if humanitarian people are
part
frustrated.
of it, yeah, and like a lot of the Gazan activists and stuff
Gaza
are
as well.
looking at what's happening there. Some of it is, I think it's the old Pottery Barn rule: you broke it, you own it, and Colin Powell famously coined that. But Eric, how much do you think is Iraq just the fact we broke it?
Yeah, no,
So,
I think
it's been broken for 2,000 years, but but ISIS was able to come in and grow precisely because of U.S. regime change and the fact that we failed to build the institutions that could sustain, a government to be able to withstand this kind of uprising.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to remember, like, ISIS is using weapons that they've seized from the Iraqi army that the United States provided. I mean, there's definitely a Pottery Barn element to this. But when you compare it to the situation in Gaza or Syria, what's different about this is, at least when you talk about it, when you talk about people on a mountain with no water and no way to defend themselves, it's really cut and dry, whereas the other situations are a lot more complicated. And so I think because of that, it's also a little easier to make the point that, like, these are really, truly defenseless people who have who have not provoked the situation that they're in, and who really can't be accused of that. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah, but I do think, I guess I come at it from a rather cynical perspective, particularly being on breaking news, and you just see what, the United States, the attention span is on international issues. It's just extremely short, and I think. I think there's a certain population in the United States that is almost, I don't want to say has grown immune to it, but has a response to these sort of humanitarian crisis where it's just sort of like, we would love to help, but, our own, it's almost like whack-a-mole with these international crises that come over. I agree that this one seems like a little bit more cut and dry, but I can already see certain audiences are just going to move on after a couple of days and are going to have that same level of weariness with any of our conflicts if it looks like it's just going to be elongated. So.
Yeah, I let's turn to a happier note.
Yeah.
I guess our attention span even is moving on. Let's go to the shout outs. Time for going around. Either something really good you've read this week, a good restaurant, someone you'd kind of like to give some praise to. We'll start with Eric.
I guess I'll give a shout out to the state of Virginia for figuring out the Uber and Lyft situation. Right, that makes my life a lot better living in Virginia. I think it's good to see that these sorts of services that I find like way easier than having to have cash on me all the time. And I'm just glad that got figured out.
Agree.
Yeah.
Jed.
Okay. Stop me if I go too long on this one because it's at the intersection of Hollywood and D.C., which is kind of like the wheelhouse of my department. I could talk about it forever. But for fans of the Netflix series House of Cards,
right.
My shout out is definitely to go. If you live in D.C., go check them out. Filming this weekend. They're filming tomorrow, Saturday. I believe that's August 9th.
Are we sending a reporter?
I hope so. Yeah. No, we'll see. I guess that would be me that would have signed that now that I think about it. So yeah, let's get someone down there. House of Cards is filming in downtown. It's pretty close to the. I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but it looks kind of like presidential inauguration routes, if you will. They're supposed to be filming B-roll and motorcade sort of. A motorcade scene, essentially from Pennsylvania Avenue between like the White House and the Capitol building. So like right along there, and a little bit and parts of the mall will also be shut down on Saturday from noon to 10 p.m. One of our great graphic designers, Julia Haslinger, put together a map that should be on our. I think is on our story right now on the site. So anyone who wants to see them, I don't know if any of the stars will actually be here for it, but like people interested in House of Cards can see them filming on Saturday from noon to 10 downtown.
Rachel, what's your shout out?
So I intentionally went for a lighthearted one considering all the topics of today. Toddler breaks through White House security. So
Who does the toddler get the shout out or the Secret Service?
The toddler.
I heard he was interrogated.
So apparently a little boy snuck through the front gates of the White House and was apprehended by Secret Service. And their statement was, we were going to. He can't even talk. This kid is so little, he doesn't even speak yet. He said, we are going to wait until he learned to talk to question him, but in lieu of that, he just got a timeout and was sent back to his parents. So kudos to this little kid.
My shout out goes to all the TV reporters covering this Bob McDonnell trial in Richmond. I've been watching Captivated on Twitter. Ryan Nobles, who's the NBC affiliate reporter in Richmond, has been basically like live tweeting every blow by blow. And I find myself distracted looking at my phone, wanting to know what new salacious detail is going to emerge. And I think that the takeaway is always take a plea deal if there's any kind of public corruption charge and you have a messy personal life.
Don't you feel like the details of that could form itself into like a really great HBO movie or something?
It's a lot of the details, Jed, in this. I mean, it's like a novel that it's like too good to be true, like too good to check.
I was thinking either that or like the whole Thad Cochran's year could be its own. Like there's several game change level.
Faulkner needs to write the Cochran story, and I don't know who's going to write.
I'm just saying, greenlight those HBO miniseries already. We're ready to watch.
Oh, that sounds awesome. HBO, are you listening? Do it.
All right, thanks guys, Eric, Jed, Rachel for joining us. Fun podcast, and enjoy the rest of August. For even more of the Politico podcast, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and politico.com/podcast.